So, hi there, everybody. This is another one of those breaking news, quasi-breaking news videos that we do. This is Bob Coppedge, CEO Simplex-IT, and I am joined with Tim Golden, or by Tim Golden, who is, and I basically have both compliance risk and compliance scorecard. And essentially, we may take a sec to talk about that, but we're first going to talk about the CMMC proposed rules. And Tim, first of all, thank you very much for joining me on this.
Hey, Bob, always great to be on here. Always great to chat with you. And, CMMC is such a big topic right now and such a hot thing going on. And I'm really interested to dive right into this. So thanks for having me.
Well, okay, great. Yeah. And I'm, because I'm a content expert in this field, because I can spell CMMC, which is actually a big part of what our industry is doing right now, is they're all scrambling to say, hey, we're an expert and all that kind of fun stuff. And you also have companies who we are going to become CMMC because we decided to yesterday. But this whole proposed rule publish, and I got some bullet points here, but what does that actually mean? What's going on here?
Yeah. And so in the federal government, there's a process in place, especially around the Department of Defense or other executive branches in the government. There is a process in place with OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, program officers, and so on and so forth. I won't get into all the gory, nuanced details of it, but essentially the way things become, I hate to say law, because it's not exactly the right term, but the way things, work through a process to ensure this is the requirements to do business with the federal government. And right. Specifically in this case, the Department of Defense, DoD, published this new CMMC 2.0 program rule for public comments, which essentially we've been talking about since 2020, 2019, 2021, yeah. Where, there are clauses in government contracts that say, thou shalt ABC 1, 2, 3. And, bring that whole thing to fruition is these things have been there for a long time. And as the federal government started to realize, people weren't actually doing the things or the requirements appropriately.
That's a shock.
So, yeah, that's a shock. And so, there's this process of bringing, these updated programs, these updated requirements, and this whole CMMC or cybersecurity maturity model through making it requirements in actual government contracts. And so this public comment thing is just one of the phases of this becoming ratified and then going into federal government contracts going forward. So it's just one of the final steps to actually bringing this to ratification and making it real, quote, quote, inside a government contract. So if you're a defense contractor and you're doing work with the federal government, there are FAR clauses or DFAR clauses in your contracts that say, thou shalt do X. And this is this sort of next phase of making sure that's ratified and in contracts, and they open these up for public comment for experts to be able to provide feedback before they ratify it. Okay. This happens a lot, not just with CMMC, by the way. There's actually been one out there for HIPAA that's been out. I was just going to say, because if you take a look at the maturation process for all of these things, you can even go back in the 70s where we basically made workforce safety an issue. You can take a look at what happened with HIPAA around the turn of the century, so on and so forth. This is nothing new, but we forget how freaking long it takes. It does.
Before something becomes law.
Yeah. And, and things do move slow with the federal government. And it is just a continued piece of the due diligence process.
Right.
Right. So, if the feds just came right out and said, you have to do this.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. Just because the feds said, is it actually right? Is it actually, enforceable? Is it actually can we even do this? Right. And so that's why this public comment, phase really gives the opportunity for those in the ecosystem to be able to provide feedback on whether or not it's true, whether or not it's right, whether or not it's applicable, whether or not it's actually able to be done, all of that fun stuff.
Because you're essentially talking about these guidelines would impact anyone who is in the supply chain process. So it's not just the company who's doing business with DoD. And there's a ton of information and specifics out there that go into much more detail than we've got time for. And you've actually created a ton of content that goes much more into that detail. But the bottom line is this is just another step in that process to make it to a point where it's required, where you call it requirements law, we'll call it whatever. So if you're part of this journey, you're probably already aware of this happening to a certain degree. And if you're not a part of this journey, this should just be another nudge that the journey is moving with or without you.
It is interesting. You know, we've had lots of conversations on LinkedIn and webinars and all around the space on the awareness problem, right? And I say awareness problem because, you know, I work a lot with what's called PTACs or MEPs. They're organizations at the state level to help local, you know, manufacturers and so local entities, or OSC, and organizations seeking service for state. They work with, you know, those end Johnny Lugnut factories, and I've had a lot of conversation with them on Johnny's Lugnut or, you know, Joe's manufacturer that are just totally oblivious to this.
Right.
And I can't believe we're like, what are we 3-4 years into discussing this now? And they're still like blinders. Like, what are you talking about? I don't know anything. So yeah, there is an awareness problem, but I think it's getting better.
Yeah. Well, and you've really got two levels of that awareness problem, because first of all, for the Johnny Lugnuts, which is like the worst anthem ever, Johnny. But anyway, but you first had that. Do we have to take security seriously at all? Period. You know, because we're too small, we're too this, we're too that. Now you've got all of the rigors that go hand in hand with the security, but now there's all these processes, all of this stuff that you have to do, and that's tough. And I get back to the part of the challenge is for the garage startup companies, is how can you do that startup world where you're lean, you're going in on a shoestring, you're doing things in a very limited way, but boy, you've got this wonderful dream, this wonderful idea or the like. And especially on the manufacturing side of things, the definition of manufacturing obsolescence is, of course, it didn't turn on. Right. You know, and that's creating a whole bunch of issues. So I've got this one slide up where we talk about there's public comments. We talk about the equivalency. Do you want to talk real briefly on what equivalency is?
Yeah, so there was another memo that came out that talked about FedRAMP. And what is FedRAMP? FedRAMP is essentially getting what's called an authorization to operate, ATO. It's basically running through a program of way more controls than just CMMC, by the way. And whether or not, so going through a FedRAMP process, getting authorized to operate through a FedRAMP process, and whether or not, if I have an ATO or equivalency of that authorization, can that help? Can that apply? Can that fulfill my CMMC requirement? And so, you know, as this flows down to MSPs, IT service providers, MSSPs, whatever other acronym you want to call yourself as somebody doing business in the tech world, those things are going to flow down to you, right? There's and this concept of equivalency, like, yeah, maybe I have a FedRAMP attestation, a FedRAMP ATO. Can that apply? It's kind of like saying, oh, we follow HIPAA. Does that mean I get SOC 2 as well? Or we have a SOC 2. Does that mean I get ISO as well? So I'm just trying to use, you know, kind of layman terms here around FedRAMP equivalency. So there was another big memo that came out. What is FedRAMP equivalency? How does it apply to us as what they call an ESP, or an external service provider? Bob, you and I, we probably use the word MSP most of the time, but the feds talk about ESP, or an external service provider, which could be a cloud service provider. It could be an MSP service provider. And there's some definitions around that as well. However, this big thing on, do we have to be FedRAMP now? I think so. And what does that look like? And Yeah, and getting FedRAMP is not cheap and pretty challenging.
So here we are looking at it from a supply chain standpoint. So there's an organization, a small manufacturing organization that is providing goods and services to a larger organization who is providing services to the Department of Defense. Now that company wants to stay in to that world, so they have to look at CMMC. But now they also, who's providing services to them, which would be your ESP, of which MSP, for the love of Pete, they're almost as good as we are with the acronyms, aren't they?
So if you're in the compliance space, acronyms are your like thing. So having been in the military, everything is acronyms. Now in the compliance space, everything is acronyms. And it works really great for us dyslexic. See, I can't even say the word, us dyslexic folk. And acronyms, yeah, it's the bane of my existence.
But the bottom line is they have to not only be concerned about what their level of compliance is, but they also have to be concerned about who's providing the services to them and who's providing services to them underneath it.
Yeah.
So it's one where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, the whole, supply chain, right? Yeah. That's the big word nowadays. That's the buzzword nowadays. It's seven degrees of Kevin Bacon, right?
Yeah.
For those of you that are, maybe I'm dating myself, but it's literally up and down the chain and who is involved in that process. Yeah. And at the end of the day, and here is the caveat that I will leave everybody with on CMMC, and that is defending and protecting our digital and physical assets as a nation, right? The last thing that we need is to see another one of our F-70 million whatever planes showing up in China or Russia or other foreign adversaries because they weren't doing the things to safeguard that information.
Absolutely. And we don't talk about that enough from the standpoint of we look at it, the cost, we look at it, the requirement, we look at the impact from an operational standpoint. That's great. But what's plan B? What is it?
Well, me, Bob, I have learned my lesson being the Department of No for a decade. I have learned my lesson to always start with why.
Absolutely.
Why? Why do we need to do this? Why? What does it impact?
And let's actually move to that briefly, because one of the things we also wanted to talk about. So what do you do? So and again, if you're already familiar with a lot of this stuff, then this is nothing new. But if you are sitting on the fence, so you're an organization that is either you've got some toes dabbling in the DoD world, or you're thinking of going deep into it, but you haven't really taken a look at this. And you and I were talking about this on a prep call, and really the first question that you brought up is, should you?
Exactly. And I even when I'm talking to Johnny's Lug Nut Factory, so it's applicable whether you're an MSP, ESP, or you're an actual manufacturer, right? The very first question that I tend to ask them is, what percentage of business revenue and profit comes from the DoD? Right? So if I'm Johnny's Lug Nut and my biggest client is Ford, 90% of my revenue comes from Ford, and 10% of that revenue comes from the Department of Defense, I have a key business decision to make.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm an MSP and I have one client that's in the DoD space and they're, $1,000 a month, and they're, 2 or 3 or 4, even 20% of my revenue, I need to really make a business decision on whether or not I want to do that work.
So, and part of the reason on that is it just is not cheap. And you could make the claim that a lot of the things that you would implement in a CMMC process are appropriate, following NIST, so on and so forth. But I think one of the things, and you bring up a good point, that we don't talk about it as much, is it is an investment decision.
It is. And so having done CMMC equivalency, wait, what's that? Having dealt with FedRAMP in a FedRAMP moderate environment for 17 plus years, starting way back in 2007 when NIST, the special publication, when it was version 3, way back in the day. Having done that, and continued to do that month over year, over quarter, over month, it's expensive, right? So there's a lot of manpower, number one. There's obviously tools nowadays that can help with this kind of stuff, but it is a pretty large nugget, cost wise, to maintain these kinds of programs.
But
right?
let me push back on that a little bit, because when you talk about there are tools and all that, there are tools to help you create that framework of the controls, the documents. But at the end of the day, you still are going to be changing how your organization
Yes.
operates. Exactly. And how they prioritize their. So you're talking about creating a lot of expense that is not considered when people take a look at the CapEx or the service subscriptions or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just throw this out there. We have been seeing pre-evaluations, or gap analysis is the damn word. I hate it, but evaluations or gap analysis ranging in the $20,000 to $30,000 to $40,000 just to do an analysis to figure out, where do I stand? That is not actually implementation or remediation, right? So bring it back to the cost. I have a DoD client in my MSP. I'm charging them $1,000 a month. Call it 10 grand a year. Okay. I myself, because of the equivalency and because of the flow down, I myself need to go through this process. That's probably going to cost me, let's just say on the low end, $25,000 to figure out where I stand.
Right.
I have one client that pays me 10 grand, and it's going to cost me 20 grand, double X, to even figure out if I'm in, where I stand.
Yeah. And that's one of those things where, and part of the challenge in our industry, the MSP, ESP, TSP, RSP, whatever, part of the challenge we've got is we have a lot of players out there who are basically saying, we'll bring you on board. We'll get you going. We'll do this. We'll do that.
Yeah.
And that's a bit of a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. So the first thing that I kind of want to, make sure we're hitting our bullet points here, right? So number one, is this the right journey for me as an MSP? Just because I have one or maybe even two clients, I would ask myself as an MSP, what is the revenue potential, or what is the current revenue of that client versus the entire client base?
But I would say that's true not just from an MSP, but also from a manufacturer or anybody else who is either has a toe in the DoD space or is looking to get it.
Yeah. And I'm not suggesting everybody run. I'm not suggesting everybody run away and don't do the work. We obviously want to be able to support our nation and support our armed forces. Being prior military, I want that support. But it is a key business decision. Should I be doing this?
Right.
And if you decide that you choose to, pursue this, start with your own assessment. There's plenty of spreadsheets around the internet that you can download, or we have one on our website, whatever, where you can even just do your own self-assessment. And I wouldn't dig too deep in it. I would literally go control by control and say, yes, no, maybe, yes, no. And like that whole exercise, you could probably, flesh through pretty quickly in an hour or two. And I'm using that hour or two loosely.
Absolutely.
So as you're doing your own self-assessment, look at a control, and if you don't understand it, it's probably a no. If you do understand it, it could either be a maybe or a yes, and literally cull through those 110 requirements and those 320 objectives. Yes, no, maybe. And then count up the number of no's and maybe. That'll tell you where you stand and determine, oh my gosh, out of the 320, I've only have 6 of them fulfilled. Probably not a good business decision.
Right. Cool. And that's basically it. So we talk about investment, and basically that would be the start with your own NIST 800-171 assessment, however that assessment manifests itself, whether it be a CMMC self-assessment, NIST self-assessment. And then, but if you do decide to do that, then you find a partner.
And you know what? There are a lot of great partners out there, and there's way more bad ones. So I won't get into the gory details of, some of us that are really eyeball deep in this have discovered on some of the quote snake oil people that are out there.
Right.
Let me just forewarn you, when you're Googling, be cautious of the first 5 or 6 links, and I'll leave it at that, right? But like you would do with anything, and hopefully everything, is conduct your own vendor due diligence. Interview people that have worked with them, interview other people in the space that may or may not know about them, right? So number one, don't click the first link on Google. Number two, do your diligence. And number three, look at the Cyber AB, right? They are the entity that is putting together the marketplace of, I hate to say the preferred, but those that have gone through the process to become a certified assessor, a certified auditor. They've gone through the training. And even in that, I have noticed some of the Cyber AB marketplace has some snake oil people.
And you're going to run into that to a certain degree regardless. But I think right now, and this is like, you're seeing the same thing with AI. You're seeing the same thing with any kind of emerging, not only technology need, whatever. When HIPAA was really starting to go big time on the IT side, you had a ton of managed service providers who were suddenly HIPAA experts and the like.
Yeah, so, of course. Yeah. I could rattle off a few of them that claim they are the HIPAA expert, but when you actually start working with them and you realize, oh, you don't know what an SRA is? A security risk assessment? Like you've never done an SRA and you call it, and you're an expert. Okay. So anyways, do your diligence. There's plenty of great people. I'll ping Summit 7 and Jacob over there at Summit 7. They kind of be a forerunner in the space. I could ping things like Edward Solutions. They're another great entity out there. And I'm not saying that you just have to use them, but do your diligence.
Absolutely.
Just like you would anything. And even before, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the other key things is you need to make sure that they are not presenting this as an easy thing. In other words, if they're presenting this to you as if this is going to be a piece of cake, that's a problem.
Yeah, there is no easy button.
Yeah.
Cool. It's kind of funny. Hold on. I love my little Yahoo, right? So there is a Yahoo button, but not an easy button.
Cool. So this is good information. Again, this is great information for someone who is kind of on the fence trying to figure out whether it be an MSP or just someone who's either in DoD lightly or wants to start taking this seriously. Again, from Simplex-IT, and I want to be very, very clear, we are not CMMC experts by any means whatsoever. We are in the space. We are working diligently towards the space, but we will have absolutely honest and blunt, and we'll push you over to other parties if it's appropriate. Happy to have that conversation. Here's my contact information. You can also look at our Learning Center, which has a bunch of other videos and the like. And Tim, why would someone reach out to you?
Yeah, so as I, kind of alluded to all along this, is I've been dealing with the NIST, space 853, 800, 171 for about 17 years. I have been living and breathing these controls forever. And I have been doing it with the federal government in my MSP forever. And like my goal in life right now with our platform and our peer group is to take people like you, Bob, and teach the next generation of MSPs what this stuff means. You don't have to be afraid of compliance. You just need to have the right people and the right processes. And we help by putting the people in the peer group and developing the processes. And then, we have a platform for managing that down the road. So, I'm always willing to take a phone call. You can find me all over LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, all the places. And we'll be launching our new website here, compliancescorecard.com, probably mid-February. In the meantime, you can find us at compliancerisk.io and, some good resources there.
Yeah, Tim, you almost had me believing you when you said we're helping people like you, meaning me, and then you made the comment of I'm the next generation of MSPs. Yeah, it's one or the other, dude, as far as I go.
So, yeah, here's the thing, Bob. At some point, right? So today you're doing work, so we're teaching you and helping you. Absolutely. At some point, people like you and I, us little older generation, are going to be moving on, and my goal is to teach, train the trainer,
Yeah.
right? Help you help your staff, right? Somebody's going to be taking over, right? And so I really like I said, my heart is to take the 17 years of wins and mistakes that I've made and help you not make the same mistakes.
Well, and I appreciate that because I prefer my own unique mistakes. Because I think I do. I have that creative twist to it. So Tim, thank you very, very much for joining. We'll have the website in some of the comments as well. And for those of you who are interested, if you are a managed service provider or in that ESP stack, I've known Tim and have kind of worked with him on a side kind of way for the last year or so. We've recently, in the last few months, much to Tim's dismay, been working much closer with his group and will continue to do so. It's really got some great services and great parts there. And again, anybody wants to reach out to us, Simplex-IT, and that's pretty much all I got.
Awesome. So, hey, Bob, thanks for that. And we look forward to helping the rest of the MSP community. So thank you.
Thank you.